Story 1. The Brontosaurus was not considered real when I learned about dinosaurs. It was simply misclassified as an Apatosaurus. However, it has been recognized as a distinct species again. Story 2. Forensic science. Everything I learned in this class was either disproven or in the process of being disproven when I took it. Story 3. In elementary school, dinosaurs were still thought to be cold-blooded and to have an extra brain in their hips because of their body size. I wish I still had the books that contained this information. Story 4. Lag of seasons. I had a 7th grade science teacher tell the class that the reason the weather is warmer in spring and summer, even though the sun is farther away from Earth, was due to lag of seasons. She claimed that the residual heating from the closer winter sun was releasing its energy in the spring and summer months. Story 5. One teacher in high school explained that he was against the upcoming teacher strike for higher wages because it would put him into a higher tax bracket and he would earn less money. He wasn't a math teacher, but still. Story 6. The 3 branches of government are equal. They check and balance each other. Laws are made by Congress. The Supreme Court is not political, and the judges are respectable, judicious, and fair. All this is absolute nonsense. Story 7. I attended a liberal grade school followed by a Jesuit high school. They taught very different views on abortion. The grade school emphasized a woman's body and a woman's choice, while the high school portrayed abortion as bad and sinful. Personally, I support the right to choose, and during high school, I found it frustrating when I was told that all women who have abortions regret their decision. The presentations were disturbing. They showed images of aborted fetuses and women in distress, which felt manipulative and deeply troubling. Story 8. Red, blue, and yellow are primary colors of pigment. In middle school, our art teacher insisted that these were the primary colors and that we could make any color out of them. For an assignment, we were required to paint using only these colors. She said that all 3 colors mixed evenly would produce black. I attempted to create black but ended up with a muddy brown. She insisted I was not applying the technique correctly. Others tried, but no one could achieve true black. Eventually, we were allowed to use red, blue, yellow, black, and white paint. It wasn't until I became an adult and changed printer ink that I realized yellow, cyan, and magenta are the actual primary colors for pigment and that the red, yellow, blue model is oversimplified for children. However, our art teacher did not seem to be aware of this either. Story 9. Over 40 years old, I believe everything I was taught in elementary school has now been proven incorrect, except for perhaps basic mathematics. Story 10. Yakko's World from Animaniacs was outdated by the time it first aired. That's how fast maps change. It's even more outdated now. For example, Czechoslovakia is not a country anymore. Story 11. Police officers are brave heroes. Working hard gets you far in life. You have to go to college. When you get a full-time job, you can buy a house. The food pyramid. Drugs are harmful. Marijuana is a gateway drug. Story 12. The trickle-down effect. I was working a minimum wage job at the time, and I remember thinking, when does the trickling happen? I am not experiencing this effect as advertised. I was not surprised when I later found out that it had been disproven years before I was even in high school. Story 13. I don't need to know my own anatomy. My future husband will fill me in. However, here is everything I need to know about his. Don't ruin his life by discussing your periods, and do not get pregnant. Story 14. Kill Paul carefully or parents get suspicious. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, genus, species. There was a guy named Paul we did not particularly care for. My son tells me that a few years ago, they added a new classification level above kingdom for bacteria and similar organisms. So now it would be double kill Paul carefully, maybe? Story 15. Evolution is not science. I was sitting in my first neurobiology course when the professor asked us who believes in this or that, and evolution came up. I was taken aback. That day really made me question things. I quickly felt like the class fool, but I have to believe I wasn't the only one. Story 16. Nothing smaller than an atom. I argued with the teacher about this in 4th grade because it seemed incorrect, but I only remember it because she became angry. Story 17. Socialism is seen as evil and oppressive. When applied within a social context that prioritizes the democratization of the means of production and the purchasing power of the working class, it often does the opposite, making traditional capitalism appear to be the closest thing to an oppressive tyranny where only a small number of wealthy individuals hold power. Story 18. You will not always have a calculator. I have one on my phone and one that I used throughout most of my university studies. I work in healthcare, and most of the electronic medical records I have interacted with have built-in calculators that perform various tasks for you. You can, and most likely will, always have a calculator with you. Story 19. Do not tell anyone I said this, but the War of Northern Aggression was primarily about states' rights. Slavery had a significant role in the conflict. In fairness, very few teachers provided that information, and it was nearly 40 years ago, but that wasn't that long ago, was it? I learned this in school from my teachers. Story 20. Sex is like a sticker. The first time you put a sticker on something, it adheres well and is great. But when you want to move the sticker somewhere else and peel it off to use again, it doesn't stick as well the second time. The third and fourth times it works even less effectively. Eventually, the sticker doesn't adhere to anything, and it just becomes a dirty piece of paper. That's what sex is like. So, it's best to give your sticker to one person and never remove it. Story 21. Komodo dragons are non-venomous. I was taught they just have some harmful bacteria in their mouths, and that you could die from an infection when bitten. Story 22. If you do not engage in sexual activity or form blood brotherhoods, you will not contract HIV. It is HIV that is contagious, not AIDS. HIV can be transmitted through contaminated blood transfusions, from mother to baby during childbirth, and through sexual assault. A person who contracts HIV has not necessarily engaged in risky behavior. Story 23. It is hotter at the equator because it is closer to the sun, without considering the angle of the planet relative to the sun. It is only a couple of thousand miles closer. I was suspicious at the time. Story 24. In law school, during an American constitutional law class, the professor informed us that because of Wickard versus Filburn, congressional legislative authority was unlimited, since anything could be considered as impacting interstate commerce. 2 years later, the Supreme Court ruled there was at least one exception. Story 25. I before E, except after C. Since there are more exceptions to the rule than there are instances that adhere to it, this is no longer taught in schools as far as I understand. Story 26. Humans only use 10% of their brains. Yes, I was taught that in Texas public schools in the 1980s. Story 27. I attended school for web design and interactive media with a strong emphasis on Flash. Flash was considered the future of the internet, but it was discontinued a month before my graduation. Story 28. Pluto was a planet. A billion used to be 1 million million. The sky used to be blue. I'm not sure anymore. Story 29. Tongue taste zones? Pluto is a planet, and the United States government has checks and balances to prevent an overreach of power by one branch or political party. Considering the recent political news in light of the last point, it appears that checks and balances in government are ineffective. Story 30. Slaves did not build the pyramids. It wasn't aliens either. They were all highly skilled professionals. Story 31. My Civil War teacher taught the lost cause of the Confederacy as fact, and this was in the North. He was incredibly knowledgeable, but he was also a sympathizer, and I think he liked to be controversial. Story 32. The Earth rotates on its axis approximately 366.25 times in a year on average. Story 33. Oh, this particular shameful lesson was known to be incorrect before I was taught it. My science teacher in 7th grade taught us that the Earth's gravity was caused by its spin. If the planet somehow stopped spinning, it would drift apart. This would have been around 1974, by which time I'm pretty sure most educated people knew that it wasn't quite right. Story 34. You could accurately determine the content of a mixture of liquids by boiling and observing the temperature changes alone. Story 35. Bending over and placing your hands on your knees hinders proper cardiovascular recovery. I believe that coaches either repeated this misinformation without verifying it or were aware it was false but preferred to see if you were paying attention. Story 36. This one has always been known to be incorrect, but it was several years before I received enough education in American history to know better. I was taught in second grade that Abraham Lincoln was George Washington's father, and he earned the name Honest Abe because, when he found out George chopped down the cherry tree and confronted him, George couldn't lie to him. They called him Honest Abe because people just couldn't lie to him. I still remember doing the Connect the Dots coloring page featuring a fallen cherry tree and a man in a tall hat admonishing a child wearing a powdered wig with his head bowed. I also remember getting in trouble for not doing the page because my seat neighbor stole mine, erased my name, and wrote his own while erasing the name from his incomplete page, which was still very visible, and leaving it on my desk. The teacher didn't believe me even though my name was still very visible and had obviously been erased. His name was Lemuel, and I still dislike him to this day for many reasons beyond the stolen workbook page. Public School, United States, 1988. Also, the whole tree chopping thing is a myth in the first place. Thank goodness the Department of Education was just dismantled. We certainly don't need them. Story 37. Do not get into the car with a stranger. How else would I have been featured on the cover of Time magazine? Story 38. People knew the Earth was round long before Columbus, and they even had a fairly accurate understanding of its size. In fact, knowledge of the Earth's size is the main reason why Columbus struggled to finance his expedition. They were unaware of the Americas, and when observing a globe without them, the distance between Europe and Asia appeared too vast to traverse without running out of food and water. In summary, people did not doubt Columbus because they believed the Earth was flat. They doubted him because all known facts indicated he would have starved to death halfway through his journey. He only survived through sheer luck. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.